Hey everyone, welcome to another topic video. This one was given to me by Himmel, and he basically let me decide what topic I want to do. And so I thought, hey, there's a topic I want to talk about that isn't necessarily shmup related, but kind of relates to video games and shmups. And I'm not always going to talk about shmups 24/7. Sometimes I want to talk about other stuff. And today's topic occurred to me yesterday while I was swimming in the pool and kind of just thinking things over, and so I was like, oh, this would be a cool topic to talk about. And the topic that I want to cover today is the difference between sports and competitive gaming and esports and how that all sort of fits together, because this is actually a pretty divided topic. I've heard a lot of people with mixed different opinions about it. So I wanted to add in my own 2 cents, my own thoughts, because I am someone who has competed in both traditional sports and in competitive gaming. I've kind of done both. And so I wanted to kind of compare and contrast the two and just my feelings on this, because I feel like, especially with the Olympics coming up, there's always going to be a lot of controversy around, are video games sports? Are video games allowed to be in the Olympics? Are pro gamers athletes? These questions. And so I'm not sure how controversial some of my thoughts will be, but I'm going to try and present them in an articulate manner. And so to get things out of the way, I think people tend to think about sports in a very concrete manner and video games in a very concrete manner. Or games, basically. It doesn't have to be video games, but games and sports in a very concrete manner. Sports are what you do in high school that you get Letterman jackets for, and games are things you do with your friends and stuff that are just for fun. That's kind of like the attitudes people have. However, what I view things a little bit differently, I kind of see this on a spectrum. And so on one end, on whatever, it doesn't matter which direction, on one end you have competitive gaming or gaming, so pure gaming. And so on that end, I would say a pure game is something like chess. Basically, something that involves interaction that does not require any physical component or very minimal physical component, and where the people against each other will be on equal playing fields regardless of their physical status. This is why I choose chess, because, for instance, this is going to sound a little insensitive, but for instance, if I sat down against Stephen Hawking in a game of chess, even though he's passed away, but in the past, I would have no advantage over him because I am able-bodied. He would still be able to play at his full capacity against me and probably destroy me, because chess is a pure game. The physical aspects don't matter. We could play on some kind of monitor. He could voice command. He could just tell me the notation of his moves and I can move the pieces for him. He could have someone come move the pieces for him. It doesn't matter. The physical interaction with the pieces is not important. In fact, there are people who are blind who can play chess at grandmaster levels, because with the notation and everything and seeing the board in their minds, they don't need that physical component. So a blind man could beat your ass in chess, it doesn't matter. However, then we have on the other end of the spectrum what I consider pure physical sports. When I say pure physical, I don't mean all down to just raw body structure. There are still skill-ish mechanics involved. And I actually compete across all this whole spectrum. So a pure physical sport to me that comes to mind is swimming and running. So swimming and running to me are pure physical sports. Yes, there is technique, especially in swimming. And I actually, was a swim coach, a swim instructor, and competed in swimming. So I'm not saying this to put swimming down, because I am a competitive swimmer, or I was. But a lot of it comes down to the body. It's all about your body and how you controlled your body. There is a mental aspect to swimming and pure physical sports that doesn't really get recognized. And that mental aspect is basically the ability to tolerate large amounts of physical stress and uncomfortableness and pain. So to be a great swimmer like Michael Phelps, to be a great runner, not only do you need that physical component of your physical body, so Stephen Hawking would not stand a chance in the pool. No matter what he did, he could never beat me in swimming because of his physical body, no matter how smart he is. It can't happen. But between two able-bodied person, the sport then becomes who can train the hardest, who can execute when they need to execute, who can refine their technique. But a lot of it comes down to pure physicality, where I was a naturally gifted swimmer. And so when I got into swim team, I basically destroyed almost everyone else on the team who had actually been swimming longer than me because of that physical gift. I didn't have this mental gift of, oh, I understand the techniques of swimming, but my body physically just adapted to the water really well, and I was a very, very strong swimmer. So that's a pure physical sport to me. And then I think what most people consider as sports actually fall in the spectrum of a sport and a game. So for instance, I think the perfect middle ground is tennis. I play tennis. I don't play it as competitively as swimming or as games. That's kind of my middle ground there too, but I have played in tournaments, and my brothers are competitive players, so I have a lot of experience with tennis as well. And tennis is like that meeting ground between competitive game, because there's a lot of tactics, there's a lot of mental game in tennis that you don't see in swimming. I don't impose mental game on my opponents when I'm swimming against them, other than just beating them physically, you know. But in tennis, there's a lot of mental game, there's a lot of tactics, but then there's also the physical aspects where Stephen Hawking, he could be a tennis mastermind, but he doesn't have the physical body to complete those plans. So tennis is that middle ground. Then I think there are other sports that are kind of further on those spectrums, but they aren't necessarily pure sports. Basketball. Basketball is, I honestly feel, is more of a game, is more on the game side than even tennis sometimes. It's hard to say because of the height thing, but basketball has a lot of physical components to it, but at the same time it has a lot of game aspects to it as well. It's not a pure physical sport like running. Even though if I run faster than my opponents, I'm more physically able than my opponents, that doesn't necessarily make me a better basketball player, right? So, and then American football, you can see where I'm going with this. On this spectrum, you can place where you want to put each sport. And the thing is that when people talk about video games, people immediately put video games at the furthest point, like chess, when I don't feel that's necessarily true, but they're not anywhere close to pure physical sports on that spectrum either, like swimming and running. And in my opinion, the Olympics began as pure physical sports. That was kind of their goal. And then over the years, with tennis, with basketball, they've kind of gone into more of a gaming side of things. But just because something's a sport doesn't make it a sport to me. For instance, bowling, I honestly don't see much of a difference between a bowler as an athlete and a video game player as an athlete. To me, it could be argued that video games require more physical ability than bowling, right? Bowling, you just need to be able to stand and have the body connects to throw the ball. Gaming, there's a lot of physical aspects to gaming people don't realize. Melee players know this pretty well because careers have ended from physical injuries in Melee, but your hands, so you need to have those hand coordination, you need to have healthy hands, eyes. Vision is extremely important. Again, I have some issues with my vision, and so that can actually hamper my skills in certain games at times, like FPSs and stuff. My brothers have much better vision than me. They destroy me. They have that quick recognition, where I have kind of bad vision. It actually hampers my ability in these games. And so there actually is a lot of physical aspects of gaming that's not really pure a game like chess, where it doesn't matter how good your eyesight is. None of that matters. But one thing I want to emphasize with esports is I know it's a marketing term, so it doesn't matter. Esports is just a marketing term. But obviously, I would not consider a video game player, and again, I play video games competitively, so I'm not trying to be elitist or anything, but I would not consider a video game player an athlete, because I think the mark of what makes something athletic has to have that physical suffering, that physical exertion, where like a swimmer or a runner, for instance, when I was competing with those, a lot of it just came down to how much can you handle, how much can you push yourself, how far are you willing to go physically exhaustion-wise. And that's not something you can ever experience with video games. Even sitting down and playing shmups for 6 hours straight, you get tired, you can get fatigued, but it doesn't have that physical pain that you will experience in a true sport. So I think that's why a lot of athletes get a little bent out of shape by when people say that gamers are athletes, because gaming, you're not really experiencing that same skill set. What makes some athletes great is just their ability to withstand agony, essentially, and just train and train and train and torture their bodies into shape. And so video games don't really have that. Video games are much more of a gaming side of things, obviously, like chess players, like even tennis players or bowlers to a degree, where it's all about like technique and tactics and understanding and cognition, whereas pure sports are more about like the physical side of things. However, with that being said, I also don't think it's fair to discredit professional gamers as being just scrubs or whatever you want to call it, or as being illegitimate compared to especially a lot of sports that really, to me, are not sports. Like golf. My brother's golf, I golf. If you want to call golf a sport, if you want to call bowling a sport, you can throw video games in there then, right? Melee players have just as much physical exertion of their bodies as a golfer does, to be honest, especially golfers who earn golf carts and stuff. For instance, my grandfather is a great golfer, and even now, he beats me in golf, but I cannot see him physically being able to keep up with me in Melee. Like, let's say he was good at Melee, his hands could not keep up with my hands, I would beat him. But at golf, you're just swinging, you have the body kinetics, which are very low exertion for the most part. He can still beat me through sheer technique. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. Same thing with bowling. Technique takes you a long way in those sports, whereas in video games, that's the same thing. So it's you always kind of have to, and of course, within video games, there are different games that are more physically demanding than others. Like I said, Melee is extremely physically demanding because of the hands. But if we're playing like Pokemon, competitive Pokemon, obviously, yeah, that's not physically demanding whatsoever. FPSs, I feel like, can be physically demanding with the eye, with your the requirements on your eyes and things like that. Or if your vision starts to go, you probably won't play very well anymore, and you'll just get destroyed. So it's all pretty interesting when you start to think about it in more of a spectrum, rather than just saying, oh, these sports have Letterman jackets, so they're sports, and a video game is just a game, so it's not competitive, or it's not as legitimate. I feel like they're both legitimate, it's just what they're testing is extremely different. But if it's all about competition, really. So the Olympics isn't really about pure physical sports anymore. They've thrown that out the window with all the other events like curling and bowling and all that other stuff. Those are not pure physical sports. So if you're going to allow bowling and curling and all that stuff, might as well allow video games, because they're kind of in that same area. But I could see, let's say the Olympics said, no, screw that, we're only doing running, we're only doing swimming, we're only doing up to tennis and basketball, like that's the line. I could respect that, because it is testing something a little bit different than what video games are testing. But, so that's the kind of state of things. I think it's kind of cool that video games are the Olympics. But at the same time, I'm not going to go as far as to say video games are sports, because they're really not. But then again, I feel like there are sports that probably should be considered games, like bowling and whatnot. Dart throwing, those are really games. Those are not sports. The people who do those are not athletes. They're gamers, actually. So, interesting to think about. Thanks for watching, and let me shout out my patrons. So we got Dingo, Kiwi, Young Money Swee, Psych, Retro Schmupper, Himmel, Dun Peel, Mark Sloan, Jake Ryan, Joe Angelo, Kay, Maz, Plasmo, and Nathaniel Davis. And again, shout outs to Himmel for letting me pick the topic. I think it's been fun talking about this. Peace.